Hello, my name is Dr. Mark Kavanaugh, and I'm here to report out on a study that was conducted by my Introduction to Sociology class here at KVCC in the spring of 2020. In sociology, we talk about social behavior and the way people act when they're in public settings, and in that discussion, we talked about different settings in which we observe people, such as shopping malls and food courts and shopping centers and stores and whatnot. And a discussion came up about how people behave in the parking lot. And in specifically, we looked at the behavior that individuals have regarding their shopping carts. And we wondered, what are the factors that contribute to having someone return their shopping cart to the corral? And this elicited all kinds of discussion about, how many people actually do that, how many people don't do that, and what are the different factors. So we decided to formalize that into a study that we called the Cart Corral Study. And the research question is, what factors contribute to shoppers using the cart corral? So the class designated this as a study that they wanted to do. We brainstormed different variables that might contribute to the decision that people would make regarding bringing their carts to the corral. And these include gender, the number of kids they have, the age, handicap status, the distance to the corral, and the weather. And we decided that the way we would do this is each member of the class would design their own data collection sheet, and they would go out to the store of their choice and make observations, bring that data back, and we would put it all together and see if we can find any relationships here. And this little movie is about the results of our study. So first of all, we had to answer the question, did the majority of people use the cart corral? This made for interesting class discussion as to some people thought people are leaving the carts all over the place, and other people thought that most people were acting pro-socially and putting the carts in the corral. We made a total of 81 observations. 27.2% of our observed people did not use the corral, while 72.8% did. So according to our data, most people are using the corral. Our first research question was to explore the idea of gender. Now, this elicited some interesting discussion about how are we going to operationalize this. We talked about what are the social symbols that we look for in order to determine someone's gender, that outward behavior, and that elicited some very interesting discussion in the class. We went with binary observations because we weren't going to be just walking up to people and asking them what their gender was. So we were looking for male and female data. 34.6% of our shoppers were male. 65.4% were female. When we took this data and we correlated it with whether or not they put the cart back or not, we found the correlation to be a negative 0.035, which in the world of statistics means it's not significant. This was not a significant relationship. So gender, knowing someone's gender, did not allow us to predict whether or not they would put the cart back. Research question number 2, the number of kids. We talked about all kinds of reasons why a person would put the cart away because they had a lot of kids, or they wouldn't put the cart away because they had a lot of kids. And again, we had all kinds of interesting hypotheses about the way this would go. Of our 81 observations, 65.4% had no kids, 17.3% had 1, 12.3% had 2, and 4.9% had 3. When we looked at the data and formed our calculation for correlation, we found the correlation to be negative 0.047, which was not significant. So the number of kids did not seem to impact the decision to bring the cart back to the corral. Our research question number 3, what about age? And this was interesting both in the indications, how would we observe age and how we would categorize them, and also what factors of being in a different generation would contribute to the decision, pro-social or not caring about things, and then also in terms of mobility and energy levels and all this, that all of that came up in terms of developing various hypotheses about these. Of our 81 observations, 24.7 we put into our young category. 42% were what we called middle-aged, and 33.3% were categorized as old. When we calculated our correlation with corral behavior, we found that correlation to be 0.150, and that too was not significant. So we have our third question here that indicating a non-significant relationship. Knowing somebody's age does not allow us to predict cart corral behavior according to the data that we collected. Question number 4, how about handicap status? This brought out all kinds of interesting discussions about how someone gets those stickers, how we're going to do, to put on their car to get a handicap status, or the thing that hangs on their rear view mirror, the license plate, and what sort of handicaps would benefit from having a preferred parking or other kinds of accommodations. Of our 81 observations, 14.8% displayed that sign, either as a sticker or license plate or the card that hangs on their rearview mirror. That is how we operationalized this. So 14.8% were disabled, 85.2% did not have any indication of disability. We calculated the correlation, and that was found to be negative 0.214, and again, not significant. So knowing somebody's handicap status did not predict their cart corral behavior. Question number 5, what about the weather? Good, bad weather. And again, we had discussions about first defining what's bad weather, and second, the hypotheses ranged across. So a person might think that bad weather would reduce the likelihood of cart corral behavior because an individual didn't want to be outside for long. But on the other hand, some people predicted that bad weather would predict that individuals would put it back because they had feelings for the staff who had to come out and collect all of those. Another factor, of course, is that I'm sending students out to make observations, and were students more likely to go out on nice days because they're going to be hanging outside in the parking lot for a while. And so we did get some good collections on bad weather, but of the 81% of the 81 observations, 71.6 were made in good weather and 28.4% were made in bad weather. We again calculated our correlation and found that correlation to be negative 0.015, and again, not significant. It is significant that so far all 5 of these first questions that we're looking at did not allow us to predict cart corral behavior, even though the rich discussion in class indicated that these would be important factors in people making those decisions. Let's look at question number 6, and that's the distance from the corral. How far they were parked from the nearest corral. How would that predict cart corral behavior? And before we go into that, let's talk about how we calculated that. In order to calculate the distance, I use an example of here is a little parking lot. We have some cars in the parking lot, and we have the location of our shopping cart corral. So let's say I want to calculate the distance for the green car. I would then calculate how many parking spots they are across the vertical axis here, and then 1 spot across the horizontal axis, and their total distance would be 6. If I was going after the orange car, they only have to go 1, and so their distance would be 1. So that's how we went about calculating the distance. Now there were a couple observations of a distance of 0, and quite appropriately, the students that reported those out when we asked about them said that the individual was parked in the same spot as the corral. They were right next to it. Not the next spot. They're actually, like, you probably couldn't open one of the doors because it was going to hit the actual corral. It was like out in the middle of the parking lot, or at the end of the parking lot line, or something like that. So the data that we collected of 81 observations, we saw lots of diversity here, so we're going to graph this. 2.5% were 0, as I just said. 16%, 1 space. 29.6 were within 2 spaces. 17.3 in 3 spaces. You see there's quite a majority here of people parking close to the corral. 11.1% 4 spaces. 8.6% were 5 spaces. 9.9 at 6 spaces. 2.5 at 8 spaces. And finally another 2.5% at 10 spaces. We calculated our correlation, and we found that it was 0.334. And yes, this was significant at the 0.01 confidence level. So we have a predicting variable that, in fact, according to our observations, distance from the corral predicted cart corral behavior. So we look at our original study here. We have the class wanted to look at the factors. We defined those variables and the rich discussion about what those were, decided on a very simply straightforward methodology. And in fact, we found that based on the collected data, the only factor that predicted the likelihood of the use of cart corral was distance to the corral. The further the corral, the less likely the customer was to use it. All the other factors failed to give us significant relationships. We certainly enjoyed this study. I hope you enjoyed some of the conversation that we've had here today about the different variables and some of the surprising outcomes that we have. So take care.